Hi, this is Ingrid Blackburn. Today we're going to create a fun, colorful project using the Butterfly Birthday butterfly dies, as well as some brusho and some textured paste. We're going to create a kind of a fun watercolor mixed media project. So to get started, I have a very thick piece of cardstock. This is actually a Naturals cardstock. It's an older cardstock by Stampin' Up. It's much thicker than regular cardstock, kind of a cross in between watercolor and that, even though it is just regular cardstock. I needed something that was going to really hold up to the texture paste. So I have a great stencil, and this is the Pattern of Rings by Winnie Walter. And with stencils, you just want to make sure that they're properly secured down, as well as your paper. The paper doesn't move on this Ken Oliver mat. And now we're going to take some embossing paste by Dreamweaver. And this is my favorite kind of texture paste to use. You can see I use it quite a bit. I have almost none left. And I am just going to spread a really nice coating here. Top to bottom, not really completely filling my card front. I've kind of left the corners with kind of a jagged partial circle, but I want to make sure the middle is filled. And so you don't need to be perfect here. I have my stencil being held down really well, and the mat I'm using is actually the mat by Ken Oliver. And it's great. It's slightly tacky, so your paper doesn't really move, and it's perfect for these kinds of projects or anything that involves, water. Not so good if you're using pebbly textures. And here is the brusho that I'm going to use. Remember, keep in mind that my textured paste is actually wet right now. It has not dried. You do not want it to dry. You need it to be wet. And we're going to first start off with the leaf green, and that was the green that I'm using. And this is turquoise. I'm going to put much more turquoise on than I am green because my butterflies are going to kind of have more of an orangish hue. And orange and blue are complementary colors, so it's going to really help this project to pop. So I want more of a blue feel, but I added a little bit of leaf green in there because the leaf green has these amazing colors that make up that greenish hue. And it just is it's a nice balance to the project. Now that you have enough crystals sprinkled on there, you want to spritz it with a mini mister, and you want to have enough water that your crystal pigment is going to actually spread, but you don't want to have too much that you're saturating your project. And once you have kind of the look that you're going for, you don't need it to be perfect. You're going to lift your stencil straight up. I can't stress that enough because you want to preserve the white of the rings or whatever pattern you're using. You want to have a relatively bold pattern. This is not a project for really faint stencils, like really light or whimsical stencils. And we're going to use what's left on the rings. I have just a regular piece of vanilla cardstock here, and I'm going to flip this over and just kind of get two projects out of one. Why not, right? So we'll just place that down. Now my tape is actually right, it's like upside down now, so I'm holding it down so that the stencil doesn't shift, taking a roll of paper towels, just kind of collecting any water that might have gotten smushed out from the stencils to the side so that I get a relatively clean print. And look at that, perfect for another project someday. Now next up, we're going to create another kind of orangish red. We're using orange and vermilion is kind of an orangish red color. I have 140-pound cardstock, and this is actually watercolor cardstock. It's cold pressed. Now here's what we created. You can see how it's still kind of slick and shiny. That just shows that it's wet. And I was trying not to move it too much because I didn't want that watercolor portion of the wet brusho to go into my pattern, but it did a little bit. And here's the other piece. That dried immediately onto the regular cardstock. The other one I needed to lay aside for about an hour. Now here I have the orange, and I'm just going to tap a little bit onto my cold press watercolor paper, and then I'm going to add some of the vermilion onto the other side, just kind of really making sure these are separate. Now once you have enough crystal down, so you have enough coverage, you're going to take the same mini mister and you're going to activate them by spritzing them. Now I'm also using a water pen, and you're going to use one by Pentel to kind of help spread this around. You can use any watercolor brush as well. I just wanted to make sure to not have like a glob of pigment that sometimes happens when you're using brusho. I just wanted to make it kind of feel a little more effortless and a little bit more of a flowy watercolor background. Now I worked with this piece for several minutes. I'm sped up quite a bit of this, and I'm going to speed it up even more. And I went back and forth with removing some of that water at the edge because you can see the watercolor paper bows when you add a lot of water to it, adding a little more pigment to areas that it might have bled away, and then using the heat tool and just constantly going back and forth. And then once I had a base, a nice colorful base that I was happy with, then I added more pigment, a little more water, and I picked up some of those, you can see those little splotches on the actual mat there. And once I add those to the project, like right here, you're just going to get some really interesting character and texture, and I love that look. And since this really was a true mixed media piece, I wanted to have that interest in the project. So I'm just going to continue to work the project and dry it and go back and forth. And I sped this up greatly just to save a little bit of time. But in all, I probably spent a good 10 minutes doing this, just to give you an idea. And you can see here what that final piece looks like. Now we're going to take the matching dies. I always store mine on the back side of my stamps, and I'm going to use a big shot to actually cut out this butterfly. I always think it kind of looks like a moth, but it is a butterfly. But I love using this particular stamp and die because it has such really bright or bold, I guess, pieces of the wings where you can really get a lot of color. So once you cut one out, you're going to cut the other side out, and you can use the rest of the scrap for smaller dies or punch circles. I always try to maximize it the most I can. Now you might be wondering why I actually cut mine out first. I find that sometimes it's a little easier when you have finer pieces like the antenna to cut them first and then stamp. So I'm going to take some VersaFine ink, and this is the black onyx ink. I love this ink pad. It's just one of my favorites to use. This is what I use actually to emboss with, but I'm not going to do any embossing, but I wanted to get a really, really dark color. So we're going to stamp that. And I'm only going to show you how I do one, but you can see it's very easy because they are clear stamps. So you can easily get in there, get a good pressure so that you get a good image. Now, it probably would have been better had I used maybe a MISTI and some way of holding that down, but that would have been kind of impossible since I kind of cut them ahead of time. And I'm just kind of holding it down, getting those dry because that is a pigment ink, and pigment ink is a little sticky. And just kind of bending the wings back a little so that they have a little flight in them, because we're going to pop those up with some of little dimensionals. Now I wanted to give these a little bit of a sparkle, so I'm taking a clear Wink of Stella pen to them and just wanted to use a little bit of sparkle here on the body and the wings, and I do that to both of them before attaching them to my project. So once you have those exactly how you want them, we're going to then pop them up to really hold them down because our card is going to be really unfriendly. We have some textured paste, we have watercolor, and then we have another piece of heavy watercolor paper. In order to get that to really adhere to that, we're going to use different forms of adhesives. We're going to do that in a second. First, I'm going to do actually a banner, and you can see I'm going to use that happy birthday, just a black piece of cardstock, and emboss that in white. Now, once you have that done, we're going to actually adhere those butterflies down. And what I was starting to talk about was using different adhesives. You can see here, I'm just going to wipe off some of that excess de-static powder that gets on there and use some larger scissors so that I get a nice straight edge. I did actually do this before doing the edge, and here's one where I cut it really close, and you can see how that extra edge really helps it to pop. So here's the different texture that I was talking about. You're going to kind of arrange where you're going to put them, and I'm going to use some different foam tape. I have them in little dimensional forms, is what they call them with Stampin' Up. You can use them with any company because they have little mini ones off to the side, and I've actually got glue dots going down the middle. Here I'm pointing to them. 3 different glue dots to hold that middle down while the wings get popped up. And then my greeting is going to be popped up as well, and just getting it perfectly arranged. And I don't actually show you, but I mat this entire project onto a black A2 size cardstock. So I have 1/8 of an inch of black going around my white base. And there you go. Look at that great color. I love it. Here are some close-ups, and you can really see how beautiful it is. You've got these amazing textures. You have white textures all around the perimeter, just kind of starting to bleed into some of that watercolor, and we have a little bit of that green peeking out for some interest. I absolutely love how this project turned out. I hope you do too. We have the sparkly butterflies. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. Recommend it to your friends. We've got a new video tutorial here every week all year long, and we have 52 from last year, and we're looking forward to kicking off a great year here at the Happy Little Stampers video channel. So thanks for watching me today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.